They told him I would pay for everything like it was a fait accompli, like blood owed blood, and my name was the bank they could always raid. I remember the exact words because they were said with the slow, satisfied calm of people who have rehearsed betrayal until it sounded polite. "Don't worry, we'll make your sister pay everything," my mother said, smiling as if she were describing a recipe. My brother Raphael laughed, like the promise was a present folded in silk. My father leaned back in his chair and tapped the ash from his cigar into a crystal tray, the motion practiced, aristocratic. The chandelier threw prisms over their faces so they looked like a family portrait. Soft, capital, P, perfect. I saw the lie in the way their eyes flicked toward me, measuring. I was sitting on the other end of the living room, pretending to read a magazine I wasn't reading, listening to the quiet click of silverware from the kitchen as my mind rewired itself. The house smelled of lemon oil and cheap confidence. The light on the parquet floor looked like a runway. Trouble makes its entrance with polish. "You'll be fine," my father said for Raphael. He meant I would be fine because I could be counted on. I had always been counted on. I learned early the feeling of being a ledger entry in other people's books. College tuition here, a bill there, an unspoken line item that read, "Natalia, future payments." I had paid because I loved them, because when your family asks your love looks in accounting terms, like transfer. I had paid because I believed there was still a contract of care underlying their demands. Then one night, a careless sentence became a contract written on someone else's terms. They would make me pay everything. My name is Natalia. I am not a martyr. I am a woman who was tired of being a resource and decided to become a reckoning. They didn't think I could see the machinery of their plan. They thought I would keep paying like an ATM, cool, silent, predictable. Raphael had hit a wall of bad decisions, gambling, bad business ventures, loans with teeth, people with patience like sharks. When he came home in the middle of the night with eyes like ash, they clucked sympathetically and promised rescue. Rescue, in their mouths, meant cost, transference. "We'll make your sister pay," my mother had said. The pronoun we was a slow, comforting wave. But the thing about waves is that they reveal the ocean floor. I saw the shape of it. For a week I watched. I let them think I was digestion itself, absorbing their betrayal without complaint. I brewed coffee at dawn, ironed Raphael's shirts when he begged for a job interview he didn't mean to attend, and I smiled while my father explained tax strategies that were really sleight of hand. I asked questions in the way that the quiet ask questions, just enough to seem curious, never suspicious. I recorded, because the habit of my job had become a second skin. I am a forensic accountant by trade. Numbers. Talk. People. Less so. People whisper. They leave footprints in ledgers. They drop receipts in the sink. I found the first breadcrumb the day after the conversation. The bank had sent me a notice, an automatic thing, about changes to an account I supposedly co-owned. That was the first key to a door that had been opened and had never been locked for me. My signature, a ghost, on a paper transferring a safety deposit box, on a notary certificate I had never signed. Forgery. The word should have set my hands trembling. It didn't. My hands have always found calm under pressure. They are the hands that balance figures on spreadsheets and the hands that count change for tips. That calm has teeth. I started collecting. A deleted email from my father to a private wealth manager requesting that assets be titled in my name. A picture of Raphael's new car with a ballooned past. Due notice snapped into the glove box. A text from my mother promising Raphael she'd make it all easy if he came home that weekend. Each piece fit into a tapestry. Each piece added weight to the thing I was about to throw. Do you know how it feels to be reduced to a line item? To be told by the people who gave you life that your life's work is theirs to spend? You can let it make you small and cleanly useful, like a tool in a garage. Or you can accept that it is also a weapon if you sharpen it. I sharpened mine. I did what they never expected. I didn't confront them. I studied them. I sat in the quiet of our family home, late at night, and watched the ghost of their faces in the window. I followed their money like a bloodhound follows scent. I rebuilt their transactions into confessions on a screen. Each transfer was a sentence. Each deceptive notary was a paragraph. I turned bookkeeping into indictment. There is a certain cruelty in catching someone who is trying to rob you and giving them the chance to confess. People always pity themselves better than they confess. I knew if I bludgeoned them with the proof immediately it would look like rage. If I wanted justice, I needed something sharper. Theater and law, humiliation and restitution. I needed to make them feel the ledger, the way I had felt it for years. So I made a plan that was patient, technical, and deliciously theatrical. I reached out to an old colleague, Lena, who owed me a favor. Lena ran a small boutique law practice with a talent for emergency orders and freezing assets. She is the kind of person who smiles and then puts a legal trap under your seat. I wanted an injunction that would prevent my parents from moving money or transferring property in reaction to what I was about to do. I needed the windows closed before the storm. We filed, quietly, with a court that owed us no favors, presenting preliminary evidence of forgery and financial coercion. The judge, an efficient woman with no patience for family melodrama, issued a temporary restraining order against any transfers or access from the accounts titled in my name and two of the family's properties. That order mattered because it took their ability to gaslight me with liquidity away. Suddenly, the hangman's noose they thought they held tightened around their own necks, and they didn't know it. While the court printed its paper, I turned to Raphael. I told him nothing. I watched him. He was a child in a suit, accustomed to the buffet table of privilege. When I left the living room that afternoon, he waved at me like a dog whose bowl is about to be filled. When I returned, there was a bottle of scotch and a card on the mantel. "Thanks for always having my back," it read. I slid my fingers across the notepad, found his handwriting, and under the ink traced a trembling that suggested he felt safe in the system of our family's deception. I decided to see how safe he really was. The day before I had my hearing, my parents invited the family for a Sunday lunch. It was their favorite theater, a room full of sun, food, and the implication of charity. They had no idea the judge had already watched 2 hours of wire transfers and a pattern of forged signatures. They had no idea that the bank manager they considered a confidant had received a copy of the restraining order. They had no idea the deposit boxes were under legal seal. They had only the conviction that I would pay, and that confidence made them careless. I arrived late, as if by chance, carrying a bottle of wine as a prop in a play they were not privy to. The house hummed with complacency. My mother rocked in her chair with the serenity of someone who believes in entitlement. My father praised Raphael for networking events he had once attended, spread with the generosity of men who have spent other people's money like a religion. "Natalia," my mother said, bright as an unthreatened bird. "You won't mind covering the extra, will you? Raphael's in a spot." Her voice had the casual cruelty of someone who expects compliance. I smiled. I said, "Of course," because the way I was about to repay them required their own words, their own complacency, their own arrogance recorded. At dessert, I excused myself, promising to get cash from the safe. They assumed I was talking about money. I went to the bedroom and picked up my phone. I opened the voice memo app and hit record. I walked back into the room with the same smile, the same calm throat. I sat down beside Raphael and waited for my mother to say the words again. People reveal themselves when they smell victory. They did not disappoint. "We'll make your sister pay everything," she repeated to Raphael, softer this time, like a lullaby. She has the accounts. She can cover what you can't." My father laughed, and Raphael's hand found mine almost instinctively. He was seeking collusion in blood. I let the recorder catch their words and the soft clink of spoons. I let the camera on my phone, the small, innocuous lens they never noticed, capture my father's face as he leaned forward, his chin like a question mark. After the meal, I walked to my car and drove to the courthouse in the shell shock of calm. I had the restraining order in my email like a talisman. I had evidence. I had the recording. I had the bank statement showing assets titled in my name that were in reality their safety net. Lena met me at the courthouse steps with a face that suggested she knew I had the taste for dramatic exits. We filed the complaint an hour later. The law is not poetry. It is a slow, grinding machine, but sometimes the machine has teeth and it chews through denial. The first public blow was the freezing of accounts. The bank placed holds on everything. The family's ability to breathe on other people's money was removed, and you could see the air leave their bodies. My mother called in a panic, small, sharp, insistent. She begged haltingly for a meeting. I agreed to meet because what I wanted wasn't their repentance. It was their confession in front of the people they cared about. I arranged for it to happen at the community hall, where our church used to meet. We invited the people who had witnessed my parents' generosity over the years. Neighbors, charity organizers, the nice couple who swapped garden produce with my mother. They came because my parents told them to come, to show solidarity and charity. They did not know they were stepping into a courtroom of conscience. I played the recording. It was simple and devastating. My mother's voice, honeyed and lethal. My father's laugh like a casket lid. Raphael's silence. The room became a held breath. People shifted in their folding chairs like birds sensing a storm. After the recording, I stood and spoke. "You told him you would make me pay," I said, my voice a little smudged at the edges but steady. "You forged my signature. You moved assets into my name without telling me. You expected my bank account to be your safety net. Is that charity?" They tried to speak. My mother's mouth opened like a drowning woman. My father's face went the color of a storm cloud. As they fumbled for words, I produced a stack of documents, emails, balance sheets, notary certificates. I watched the way other people's faces fell when presented with evidence of a life they admired that had been painted with someone else's money. Then I did something no one expected. I did not demand retribution for myself alone. I demanded accountability for everyone they had swallowed up as collateral. I produced a list. Unpaid contractors, charity donations that had been rerouted, the friend of Raphael's whose medical copayments had vanished into thin air. I had spent nights tracking down names and receipts. The ledger I'd made of their callousness read like a crime scene. The room supplied its own adjudication. Anger rose like a tide. People who had been grateful for my parents' generosity turned out to be the very ones who'd paid a different kind of price. Shock and betrayal are contagious. My brother sat in the front row like a man watching his reflection crack. Legal systems do their work. Communities do theirs. The story broke in the small town like a pushed over House of Cards. The bank's temporary freeze became a public scandal because someone with too much time on their hands, someone who had once taken a donation from my parents and now felt betrayed, took the documents to a local paper. The reporter smelled blood in the ledger and came with lights and questions. My parents called lawyers who called back other lawyers until the house was full of men with clipped ties and clipped lies. Raphael's world unraveled faster. The creditors who had assumed he had a family chest to crack found themselves facing accountants with subpoenas. The people he'd borrowed from were not interested in family promises. They wanted collateral. My parents' attempts to shift blame onto me became a spectacle, and spectacle eats privilege for lunch. But here is the thing about revenge. It is not the same as justice. Revenge wants the heart of the offender to feel the tilt you felt. Justice wants the scales to be rebalanced. I wanted both. My plan included both. First, restitution. We forced audits, demanded repayment plans, and used the law to reclaim what had been siphoned. The bank was cooperative once it saw the mountain of evidence. The notary involved was investigated for malpractice. My parents' access to the safety deposit boxes was revoked. Our community watched as my parents' social capital withered like fruit left out to rot. Second, exposure. In our town, reputation is currency. They had spent their reputation consuming others. I reclaimed it by telling the truth publicly, through the paper, through meetings, through recorded confessions led by my own careful question. I documented, not to humiliate for the sake of humiliation, but to dismantle the myth that family entitlement is inevitable. And third, my favorite, poetic correction. I did not want my parents to lose everything, because cruelty is not cured by annihilation. I wanted them to sit in the light of what they had done and feel the hunger of being without the power they had wielded. So I structured restitution in a way that forced them to experience the discomfort they had so casually imposed on others. We arranged for the properties to be managed not by a hostile force, but by a community trust that paid back the people my parents had stolen from. The trust would use income from the properties to repay contractors, to reimburse donations, to provide small grants to people left worse off after Raphael's debts were funneled through them. My parents were made to participate in the meetings of that trust, forced to present budgets and justify expenses in public. They had to sit across from people they had once thought beneath them and explain line by line how they would make amends. The humiliation was surgical. It was precisely the kind of slow administrative reckoning they had inflicted on others. Long, boring, and deeply eroding. They had to ask permission for things they had once given orders about. It was delicious in a way that tasted like righteous citrus. Raphael tried to bargain. He begged me in the parking lot of a restaurant, his face soft with a new kind of fear. "Please," he said, thick with shame, "you don't have to ruin them." I looked him in the eye and said, "It's not about ruin, Rafa. It's about repair. It's about not letting you and the people you love treat me like a bank. It's about everyone having to settle their own debts." He looked at me like a child caught stealing from a cookie jar and asked me to hand him the jar and pretend not to see. There is a moment in every story where the protagonist can choose to be merciful or complete. I chose completion. The final twist, the part they never saw coming, was not a dramatic reveal of forged wills or sly legal maneuvering to take their house from them. Their house was still there. Their name on the deed had not miraculously changed to mine. The twist was simpler, and in its way, far crueler. I reclaimed what they had stolen from others and paid it forward, but I also reclaimed my own life. I cut the cord. A week after the trust meetings began, I walked into our family home with a single suitcase. My parents watched me in a silence so thick it felt like the pause before a verdict. I sat across from them at the dining table where they had once signed away my dignity like a contract. I slid a letter across to them, a formal renunciation of any further financial responsibility to Raphael or to them. I had sorted through accounts and removed myself from every financial entanglement. I had closed the doors they tried to lock behind me. I had given them precisely what they had begged for, political distance, and it held them in a different prison, the one made of consequences. "Where are you going?" my mother asked, not yet bereft of her performative calm. "Forward," I said. It was the most honest answer I could give. "I am starting a foundation in the name of the people you hurt." I am going to teach kids financial literacy. I am going to make sure no one else in this town thinks their sister or daughter is their family ATM. My words landed like stones. They expected fury. They received a plan. Months later, when their appeal lost momentum and the legal fees had hollowed a few lines from their ledger, they sat on the porch swing outside their house, smaller somehow. Why? My father asked me once, voice brittle with the sense of a man who had learned that the world is sometimes a mirror. Because, I said, and meant it. You taught me how to read a balance sheet and how to read a person. You taught me how to follow money, so I followed you. You taught me what you thought love looked like, obligation. I taught myself what love actually looks like, boundaries. They did not like my answer. They wanted to imagine it as cruelty. It wasn't. It was the accounting of a life. One night, nearly a year after the recording, I received a letter from Raphael. He had moved to a city 3 states away and found work that would keep his head above water. Small, honest things. He wrote like someone who had been taught to live without the safety net of other people's money. He thanked me and said, "You were the only person who never tried to feed me more debt." I did not need his gratitude. I had already received what I needed. Freedom. Here is the twist the town still whispers about when they swap the story like a brazen seed pod. When they thought they were making me pay everything, they had in fact transferred liability into my legal name precisely because they thought they could control me. They thought I would be compliant. They did not realize they were creating a lever that, once pulled, would not just immobilize them but be used for repair. The world has a way of turning your arrogance against you. By signing their greed and their cons into the public record, they had made themselves accountable in a way that no private shaking of a hand could undo. In the end, I did not keep the money. I redirected the reclaimed funds into the trust, into restitution, into scholarships for children whose parents had been eaten alive by the same kind of family greed. I did not become wealthy. I became clean. I became free. I walked away from the house with my head high and a suitcase that felt lighter than the years of being expected to be an ATM. They never asked me to be a person again. They had always needed me to be a resource. They had believed kindness was an inexhaustible well they had the right to tap. They were wrong. On the day the last contractor was paid and Raphael finally filed for bankruptcy with dignity, I sat on a bench outside the courthouse and watched my parents leave the building. Their steps were small, the world suddenly fuller of friction. A woman crossed their path and stared, recognition like a winter bloom on her face. She said what everyone said in town. I never thought they were like that. Neither did I said, to no one in particular. They told my brother, "Don't worry, we'll make your sister pay everything." They thought they had the final word. They were wrong. They had written the story's last line with their arrogance, and I rewrote the ending. I was never their ATM. I was their reckoning.